So I have this skirt that I got at the Goodwill. I'll show you. It's houndstooth, which I like. But it's like too big, obviously. Also, because I think some of you maybe have noticed the bank robber in the background. First off, it was my daughter's 6th birthday 2 days ago, and they played pin the handcuffs on the burglar because it was a spy party. But more so, everybody on Instagram's been matching their backgrounds to their outfits. And I was all like, my outfit's gonna be black and white, and so is he. So now I match. What? So this is this totally cool skirt that I got at Goodwill. Okay, so first off, clearly this thing is like, you know, if I just lost a lot of weight or something. Also, the whole back is elastic, which, yeah, but closes with buttons, but look, there's no zipper, so I could be like, whoo. I don't like that, okay? Because what if I tuck in my shirt and halfway through the shirt, it's like halfway through the day, halfway through the shirt. Oh my gosh. I promise I haven't drank that much. I'm just having fun. Halfway through the day, my shirt might be hanging out of my skirt. That's weird. Go to Goodwill and find a long skirt, basically, that fits if you pull it up way too high. I've got my dress form. I love this dress form because you take the cover off and you put it on yourself and sew it so that it's the same as your body. I haven't done mine in a few years and I need to redo it. But it's super cool because then it's the same shape and size as you, which is great. But I have my dress form. Also, my dress form does not have a name. I would love to name my dress form. Please comment below a good name for this. Okay, I also have my seam ripper. And yes, it is like a box cutting knife. And a pair of scissors. I wanted my pinky shears, but I don't know where they went. This is really yellow. I'm gonna change the settings on this video because it looks really yellow. Okay, never mind. It's just gonna be yellow. I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to put this on my dress form to be named by all of you beautiful people. Oh, I forgot pins. Get pins too. I'm gonna cut this off. Yeah. I wonder if I can rip it. It's crappy polyester. Ready? I've been working out. Apparently not enough. I'm gonna separate the front of the skirt from the back of the skirt. And this skirt is big enough that I don't have to worry about seam ripping the whole thing. I'm just gonna cut it open. If your skirt's kind of tight on you when you pull it on, seam rip it. Don't cut the seam out or you're gonna lose like a solid, another inch. Another inch. Okay, so I took both sides off. So then I put that waistline as a neck. I just wrapped it around the neck and everything else kind of fell down. And then you just want to decide where to cut so that it's low enough on the top, but you obviously want to make sure to leave enough room on the bottom for a skirt as well. So decide where exactly you would like to cut on the top. And then I just kind of pinned it straight back so that I could form pleats, or not pleats, darts. And to do the darts, all you do is smooth your hand down the top and then smooth your hand across right at the bust, and it'll form a little triangle, and you just fold it down and pin it there. And then I just cut across like where I wanted the armholes to be, and I cut straight down at the sides. And then I took a pin and actually stuck it in that dart, and I put another one at the end of the dart so that I would know where those are. And then I folded it across to the other side so that I could make them even. And I pinned it on top of the other side once I had it at the halfway. And then once it's pinned, again, make sure everything's really nice and even. You can cut that side as well. So this is after I'd cut it. I took a marker. You don't have to use a marker. You can use chalk or something. My fabric was really thick, so I knew it wouldn't bleed through. And then I marked where all those pins were from those darts that I created. And then I drew a line across them to make it easy to sew them. But that way too, I was able to actually measure them out and make sure they were even on both sides so that I didn't have crooked darts. And then I went ahead and opened up the rest of the waistband, the rest of the way across. I still kept it attached to the top of the skirt, which is the top of the shirt now. I guess we'll call it the shirt now. So I kept it attached to the top of the shirt still, but I opened it up all the way so that it would lay flat. And then I cut off like the buttons and the buttonholes and things like that. That way I could open it all up, as you see. And then I cut off the inner layer. You don't necessarily have to do that. My fabric was scratchy, so I didn't want it against my neck. So I cut the inner layer off and decided to make my own lining inner layer. So I just measured how big I needed that to be and cut an equal sized piece. So basically the part I cut off, I cut a same size piece as that from my lining. And I just used a really soft cotton for my lining on this one. And then I laid out my fabric, my lining fabric again, so that I could line the entire bodice with it. So I just laid it out on top of my fabric and took my rotary scissors and just cut the whole way around. And I did not cut the actual neck band, waistband, whatever out, because I already cut a separate piece for that to be lined from. And you can make it the same length as well. And then, so I took some chalk and marked where my darts ended. And then I also folded over and marked the point of each dart and drew a straight line just to make it easier to sew. And then for the back, I cut off the waistband of the back of the skirt. And then I cut down the center of it because my skirt had a center seam. So I cut that out. And then I also made sure to cut it the same length. So like cut the same amount of bottom off as the front so that the skirt and the back would be the same length in my separates. And then I started pinning it on my mannequin just so that it would lay flat. Took me a little while to kind of decide what to even do with it. And I left some gap in the front and the back because I was going for kind of like a mod vibe where it wasn't right up against my skin, but more of kind of hung. If you want it right up against your skin instead, just make sure you pin it that way. But as you can see, I left kind of like a gap across the back and across the front when I pinned mine. So then again, just pin it really well to the bodice. And I did a similar armhole for the back as the front. And then I just placed it on top of the other side of the skirt
because it's two separate pieces, so it was easier than doing it on the mannequin. And I just lined them up really well, make sure all your lines are still the same directions and everything. And then I just cut out an exact piece for the opposite side. And then I made sure that they were the same length. I just like pushed my dart closed so I could make sure that the side seam was the same length. And then I just trimmed up my edges a little. Do make sure if your pattern is only on one side, if you have a funky pattern, that you have like mirrored sides so that both of them don't face the direction. Like you need a right side and a left side. But my fabric was the same on both sides, so it didn't really matter. So then I folded my lining fabric in half and I put one of the back pieces on that, and I cut out lining fabric as well. And then I went ahead and sewed those darts. All I do is fold it together, right sides together, and sew across that line I drew. And then I sewed the side seams together on the lining and the outer fabric once all my darts were sewn. And then with right sides together, I put the lining and my correct fabric together. And then I took bias trim, double folded bias trim, and I stuck it inside of that so that the like open of the fold was on the raw edge of the fabric. That way when you turn it right side out, it has this cool little black band across it. So then for the skirt, darts are kind of hard to just measure out for newbies, so I figured I would just pin it on myself. I pinned it to my leggings. Wear something like leggings when you're figuring out your skirt if you do it on you. This way, if you don't have a mannequin or something, you can still do this. And all I did was make sure the edges go straight down and line up with the back. And then I just like pinch it so that the waistband fits. So like it's easier to see with this back part. I made sure that my hips, the widest part, fit comfortably in it, but then obviously the waistband is just hanging off of me. Okay, so I pinned it so that the sides go straight down, again, so that my hips fit. And then I just pinch it in the back so that the waist fits better, and I put a pin in it. Obviously, be really careful so you don't like pin yourself. That's dangerous. And just like adjust it until the waistband fits. And then maybe even mark like where, I guess, the curve of your butt is so that you know how far down to go on the darts. So there I put like a pin where I want my darts to end. And then just to make sure they were even, I folded my fabric in half and made sure they were actually centered. And I had to move these ones a little bit over. And then also measure like how far apart your pins are. So my front ones were like a 1/2 to 1/4 inch wide total. So I just measured how far apart they needed to be, because again, mine were off-centered, so I needed to move mine over a little. If yours are centered, you don't have to undo them and redo them. But as you can see there, they lined up really good. And then I knew they needed to go 4 inches down because that's where I'd marked it. So I drew a little line. Chalk is better than permanent marker, by the way. And then I just put a mark right where my pin was in the fabric, so that when I took the pin out, I had these 2 little lines or marks to make my dashes from, my darts. Wow, I can't say anything right now. So then on the back, my darts actually did line up really nicely. So I was just trying to make my pins go vertical instead of horizontal right there, but they lined up really well. So all I did was mark right where the pin was, like basically mark on top of the pins so that you end up with those little marks. And I had stuck that pin how far down I wanted them to go, so I drew a little dot in the center of the 2 lines. And then just with a straight ruler, mark those darts as well. And then the back of my skirt had a slit and I needed to close that. So I opened up with my seam ripper where it was sewn down to the skirt so that it would stick straight out again. Most darts in the back are sewn down to the fabric so they don't like flap around in the back. And then I just pinned that straight down and sewed that close. It was just too short of a skirt to have an opening in the back like that. Man, that clearly took me a lot of time. Okay, so then sew those darts. All right, not don't sew the darts yet. You want to do lining. So for the lining for my bottom, I didn't use cotton. I obviously, again, just traced it out like I did on the top, but I used actual lining fabric because lining on a skirt is a little bit different on the than a shirt because it keeps you from sticking to your skirt. So it doesn't like bunch up when you walk or anything. So it needs to be something kind of slippery. But all I did again, I just like measured and replotted the exact same darts onto the lining as I had with the skirt. So, okay, fold it in half, put the skirt onto the fold, make sure the darts are open and not pinned closed, and then just cut around the edges, and then open that up, and use that ruler to mark exactly where the top darts are, and measure down and directly in the center of those two darts, put how far down they need to go, and then connect the dots. So after you sew those darts, it should fit you pretty much like a glove, except for that the edges still were not quite to the same length. So I pinned mine back onto myself, but you can see like the waistband and the darts and everything fit really, really nice at this point. But I pinned it back onto myself, and then I talked to my daughter, and then I basically just pinned where they need to match up, because as you can see, the front was way too big, and that way I would know where to cut it. And you can even draw that seam on you while you're wearing it so that you know exactly how curvy it needs to be or anything. But this is not my first rodeo, so I kind of knew how curvy it needed to be. And as you can see, like if you trace it while you're wearing it, you end up with these little lines. If you trace it while you're wearing it, don't cut on that line. Make sure that you cut at least a 1/2 inch out so that you have a seam allowance to sew on. Like so. And again, I made sure that both sides were even by folding it in half so that one side wasn't like wider than longer than the other. And then I did the same, make sure the lining is the same sizes, and then put one side together and sew down that side. Sew the same side together on the lining. And then I had a piece of 2-inch elastic that I cut to the same length as the back, just a touch smaller, like maybe 1/2 inch to 1 inch. And then for the front, I didn't want elastic on it. I wanted like a cotton band. So the back I already had that elastic for, because that way I didn't have to put darts in it. The front, I didn't really need darts. The back, I would have had to put darts or something in. But I basically just traced around that band on the front. And I knew I needed it at least 2 inches tall because that's the same width as my elastic. And I added a 1/2 inch above and below because the elastic does not have to have seams in it, but this cotton does. So I needed to add 1/2 inch seam allowance on the top and bottom. And I went ahead and cut that out, and there's 2 of those. It's folded, so make sure you cut 2, unless you just want elastic the whole way around. And then I cut interfacing for that as well. With waistbands, technically for the top band, I should have done this. I'll point that out later. Things like that, you need to interface them. Otherwise, they can get really funky real fast. It keeps them looking really nice and stiff and crisp so you don't get weird wrinkles. Okay, so then I put the elastic inside of it and sewed down that other edge. Yeah, down that edge and across the top. And then you open it up and you have one long, nice waistband, and then iron that really, really well. So then line up your lining and your front, and then put right sides together on the waistband and pin that across the top. And just sew across that. And then I cut like a 1/2 inch right where the cotton meets the elastic, only on the correct side of the band so that I could fold it over and I tucked my edges inside and pinned them. I pinned it just below where the seam was. You want it to be below the seam. That way you can sew it with the right sides together and it'll hit that line. If it's above the seam, when you sew on that seam, it's not going to catch it. But then you do a stitch in the ditch. So sew inside of that seam from the front side and it'll catch everything on the back side since you pinned it below that seam. Okay, so then since we cut that little hole, whatever, we can put the elastic onto the right side of the fabric. And I just pinned mine a couple times. Again, my elastic is like 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, maybe an inch smaller, shorter than the top of the back, because that way it'll curve in to my back, because your back has a curve to it. And then I just sewed across that. And that part doesn't need to actually stretch. The elastic is just so I didn't have to put darts in the waistband. So then sew the zipper on. And make sure to trim off the little waistband parts. And then sew the other side of the zipper on. Make sure you do like right sides together with the zipper. And pin down those little edges that are at the top. Okay, so the zipper's in. And for the bottom, you can just sew all the way down the skirt and the lining if you want. Make it real easy. What I did though, I do them separate. So I did just the skirt first. Make sure your edges are lined up, because in the skirt I used the finished edges of my actual skirt. And then I did the lining next. That way they're separate still and they can move a little freer around themselves. And then I hemmed the lining and the skirt was already hemmed. So the skirt's pretty much done at that part. It's done. So then my straps in the back were not long enough for some reason. So I literally just cut like this weird rectangle of 2 pieces of fabric to attach to the top. And I sewed one side together and then put it over the strap like down so that the top was lined up, and sewed across the top, and then you fold it upwards. And then I used that same bias strip and I attached it down the sides to finish the sides. And then I stuck it the same length apart into the neckline, and I rolled the back into the neckline so that it won't catch when I sew it. And then I pinned that whole neckline down. And it's rolled inside of that. And then if you just sew across the edge, when you pop that out, so like sew down the side and across where you pinned, and now you have this really nice finished edge with no visible seams. So then the other side again, pin that in there where you want it. It doesn't really matter which side of the neck that you pin it to. And then you roll it up inside of the neckband and pin that really well the whole way across. And when you sew across and down the side, you get these really nice edges. Yay! And then my daughter sat down and helped me. And then we're going to stitch in the ditch the rest of it. So again, pin that, like fold the inside of the rest of the neckband where it's on the center of the front, further than the line below, and then stitch in the ditch across, or sew inside the seam. Okay, so then I measured across the bottom of the shirt, and I cut a 4-inch wide piece, the same length as the bottom of the shirt. And my rotary was giving me a ton of issues for some reason. I need a new blade on it. Actually, I think I cut it 5 inches. Yeah, 5 inches. Cut 5 inches, not 4, across the bottom. So it's 5 inches wide and the same length across. Cool. Then fold that in half and iron it really well. And then fold those, open it up after you do that, and fold the top and bottom in 1/2 inch and iron that really well. Then sew one of the folds across, and then, because all your folds will just like tuck everything inside really nice. It's kind of like making your own bias tape. And then just sew on your buttons in the back where you want the buttons to be. And ta-da! I hope you enjoyed this. Please like this video, subscribe for more fun stuff.